So, one teaching mechanism that Paul uses in the book of Romans, he'll teach something and then he'll go and he'll take the seat of the listener and he'll raise an objection or raise a question that the listener might raise. For example, when he's teaching in chapter 5 that how when sin abounds, grace abounds much more, he runs, takes the seat of the listener and says, "What shall we say then? Shall we sin that grace may abound?" And the answer is certainly not. A little later, he runs and takes the seat of the listener and says, "What shall we say then? Shall we sin because we're not under the law, but under grace?" Then he goes back to his place and says, "Certainly not." A little later in chapter 7, he's teaching that we have to be freed from the law because the law stirs up our sin. Then he runs, takes the seat of the listener, and raises the objection. He says, "What shall we say then? Is the law sin?" And he runs back to his place and says, "Certainly not." He does this many times. We come to chapter 9. He's teaching that God has mercy on whom he wills and compassion on whom he wills. And he runs, takes the seat of the listener, and says, "What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God?" He runs back to his place and answers, "Certainly not." Now, today, we'll see him do that again. However, he does not raise the wrong question, the wrong objection, the wrong conclusion. But in our text today, we see he presents the right conclusion. And that brings us to our text, Romans chapter 9, we're in verse 30. He says, "What shall we say then?" So he's raising it again. So he's just been teaching that God is sovereign. And God, in his sovereignty, he has mercy on whom he wills, and whom he wills, he hardens. That God in his sovereignty is working all these things for his glory, for his purpose. And he raises the question, what shall we say to these? And he says that the Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained to the righteousness, even the righteousness of faith, but Israel, pursuing the law of righteousness, has not attained to that law of righteousness. Why? Because they did not seek it by faith, but as it were, by the works of the law. For they stumbled at that stumbling stone, as it is written, "Behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone, a rock of offense, and whoever believes on him will not be put to shame." So we're not going to go into detail today. Lord willing, the next time or next few times we'll go into more detail. But I just want to speak of the conclusion that Paul draws from this. So it's been talking about God, that he sovereignly dispenses his mercy. God, remember, he chooses one and rejects another. God, remember, he sets his love on one and hatred is on another. God, remember, has mercy on one and he hardens the other. What shall we say then? Oh, it's God's fault, right? If God is sovereign, then everything God does, what do we have to do? I mean, we can't do anything. Remember, we're the clay. He's the potter. He makes whatever he wants. Makes one vessel for honor, another vessel for dishonor. Isn't that just what Paul says? So we're just clay vessels. And the potter, the creator, he's going to do whatever he wants. So whatever happens with my life, I'm not to blame. It's God. No, that isn't the conclusion we draw. He says, what shall we say then, and what? Does he say that the Gentiles, they were chosen by God? That God showed them mercy? God set his love upon them in his sovereignty? That's not what he says. Does he say that the Jews, they were rejected by God? God said God left them under his hatred? God hardened them? Is that what he says? Is that his conclusion? No. He brings up their responsibility. See, there's one very important thing you must always remember with God's sovereignty and your responsibility. Listen, you must Believe in God's sovereignty like you have no responsibility, but believe in your responsibility like there is no such thing as sovereignty. You must hold these two things at tension. You say, how can we reconcile the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of men? Well, I'll answer like Spurgeon. I don't reconcile friends. There was never a falling out. You must hold these things at tension. If you can't understand them, the problem's with you. The problem's with me. It's not with the infinite God, the infinite, perfect, righteous, and holy God. The problem is not with him. I'm the sinner. You're the sinner. We must hold these two things at tension. And there's a reason we must do it. Not just so we can have some theological framework of how we think. No, it has everything to do with how we live. Because look, if one of those sides is lacking, we will be off balance in our Christian life. See, if we just believe, oh, it's my responsibility and we're diligent, we go do it, but we don't believe in God's sovereignty, we give ourselves the credit. We get puffed up with pride. But then if we go to the other extreme and say, oh, God is sovereign, oh, it doesn't matter what I do, we aren't diligent like the Bible tells us to be. We don't pursue holiness as we ought to. We don't put to death our sin as we ought to. So we must hold these things at tension. The sovereignty of God, the responsibility of man. We must hold to sovereignty like there's no such thing as our responsibility, but hold to our responsibility as there's no such thing as sovereignty. Just like we see here in this text. This is crucial. You must hold to the sovereignty and responsibility like this. I must hold to sovereignty and responsibility like this. Now, with that being said, what is our responsibility? Yes, God is sovereign, but if we are 100% responsible, what is our responsibility? Let's look again. He says, what shall we say then? That the Gentiles, listen, who did not pursue righteousness have attained to righteousness, even the righteousness of faith. That's our responsibility. Faith. Now, let's look at the Jews. Let's look at Israel. But Israel, pursuing the law of righteousness, has not attained to the law of righteousness. Why? Because they did not seek it by faith, but as it were by the works of the law. So, we can pursue righteousness or pursue that righteous state before God, that righteous standing before God, either by faith or by works. And we see Israel failed because they sought it by works, but the Gentiles, those who were not ethnic Jews, those of the people groups of this world that God did not send Jesus Christ to and begin working with, he says they attained this righteous standing before God because they sought it by faith. How does that work? Well, let's keep going. Concerning Israel, it says, for they stumbled at that stumbling stone, as it is written. Listen, behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone, a rock of offense, and whoever believes in him. So this stone is a him. Who's that him? This is Jesus Christ. It says, whoever believes or have faith in him, on him, will not be put to shame. So, listen, you can either stumble over Christ by pursuing a righteous standing before God, pursuing your salvation by works, or you can believe in Christ and attain that righteousness. How does faith attain that righteousness? Because Jesus Christ, he came and lived a perfectly righteous life to satisfy that requirement of God so that it can be given to you. But it's a gift. If you try to work for it, you're not getting it. But if you believe in Jesus Christ, if you cast your life on Jesus Christ, you commit your life to Him by faith, you deny yourself to follow Him, losing your life for His sake. It's no longer my life, it's Christ's life. I will live for Him. And you live for Him by faith, then you receive His gift of righteousness, and His life becomes your life. And that's how God sees you. And you are seen as righteous before a holy God. So that's your responsibility. That's my responsibility, to put our faith in Christ. And when we do, remember, it's only because of God's sovereignty. So we give God all the glory. So again, we must believe in God's sovereignty like there's no such thing as our responsibility, but believe in our responsibility like there's no such thing as God's sovereignty. And then we come to the right conclusion and we live based off that right conclusion.